The wind howled like a wounded animal, shaking the small cabin's windows as if testing their resolve. Morgan Hayes pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders, watching frost patterns form intricate designs on the glass. The electricity had gone out an hour earlier, leaving only the fireplace to battle against the advancing cold. The orange glow painted long shadows across the wooden floor, turning her modest living room into a dance of light and darkness. Outside, the snowstorm raged with unprecedented fury. The Weather Service had called it the worst blizzard to hit the Adirondacks in decades. No one would come to check on the young woman who lived alone at the end of Pinewood Trail, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. Morgan preferred it that way. Her fingers traced the edge of a framed diploma hanging crookedly on the wall, Master of Social Work, Columbia University. A remnant from another life when Morgan Hayes had walked the busy streets of Manhattan with purpose, her steps guided by the belief that she could make a difference. The cabin walls seemed to close in around her as memories threatened to surface. She turned away quickly, focusing instead on practical matters. The firewood would last another day if she rationed carefully. Food supplies were adequate. The old bathtub was filled with water for when the pipes inevitably froze. Morgan checked her phone again, no signal as expected. The storm had severed her last connection to the outside world, though few would notice her absence. The library where she worked part-time would simply assume she couldn't make it through the snow. The diner in town would find another waitress to cover her weekend shifts. No one would worry unduly about the quiet young woman who kept to herself, who revealed little and asked for even less. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as a tree branch surrendered to the weight of accumulated ice. Morgan flinched, memories flashing unwanted across her mind. Glass-shattering accusations, flying betrayal, burning like acid through everything she'd built. She forced herself back to the present, her breathing controlled and deliberate. That life was behind her now. 2 years had passed since Edward Chambers had decimated her savings, her reputation, and her trust in a masterfully executed con that left her professionally humiliated and emotionally hollowed. The sudden knocking nearly caused her to drop the fire poker. 3 sharp raps against the front door, barely audible above the storm's rage, but unmistakably human. Morgan froze, every muscle tense. No one ventured this far up the mountain during good weather, let alone in a blizzard. The knocking came again, more insistent. Morgan reached for the poker, again gripping it like a weapon as she approached the door cautiously. Her heart hammered against her ribs as childhood warnings echoed in her head. Don't open the door to strangers, especially not in the middle of nowhere, especially not to men. Through the frosted peephole, she could make out a tall figure hunched against the wind, snow collecting on broad shoulders. The stranger shifted, revealing something no someone smaller held protectively against his chest. A child. The realization sent conflicting emotions coursing through her veins. The child coughed, the sound carrying faintly through the howling wind, sharp and troubling, even at a distance. The deadbolt slid open with a reluctant scrape, the door pulling against the wind as Morgan opened it just enough to see the visitors clearly. The man stood taller than she'd estimated, his face partially obscured by a snow-dusted scarf. His eyes met hers, dark, exhausted, but alert with a father's desperate vigilance. The child in his arms, a boy no older than 6 or 7, shivered violently despite being bundled in what appeared to be the man's coat as well as his own. "Get away from my door." Morgan's voice emerged sharper than intended, the poker held defensively before her. "I don't let strangers in, especially not at night." The man didn't move closer, respecting the invisible boundary she'd established. "Please." His voice was deep but quiet, carrying no demand despite the urgency of his situation. "My son is sick. Our car broke down a mile back. We just need somewhere warm until the storm passes." The boy coughed again, the sound rattling and wet. Morgan recognized the potential signs of pneumonia, developing her medical training from crisis intervention, automatically cataloging symptoms. "One night, that's all." The wind whipped her words away, forcing her to repeat herself louder. "You sleep by the fire, don't touch anything else, and you're gone when the road's clear." The man nodded once in economical gesture of agreement. "Thank you." Morgan stepped back, allowing them just enough space to enter. "Move quickly, you're letting the heat out." The stranger carried his son inside, snow melting from their clothes to puddle on the wooden floor. Morgan secured the door against the storm, the lock clicking with finality. She maintained her distance, poker still in hand, as she gestured toward the fireplace. "Put him on the couch. I have blankets. Extra wood is stacked by the hearth." The man gently laid his son on the faded sofa, movements tender despite their efficiency. He unzipped his jacket and tucked it around the boy, prioritizing the child's comfort over his own. The gesture wasn't lost on Morgan, who observed with clinical detachment that slowly began to crack as the boy's coughing intensified. "What's his name?" Morgan moved toward the kitchen, maintaining a wide berth around her unexpected guests. "Tyler. He's 6." The man rubbed his son's back in small circles as another coughing fit seized the child. "I'm Robert." Morgan didn't offer her name in return. Instead, she filled her dented kettle with water and hung it over the fire. "I have some children's medicine and herbal tea. It might help with the fever." She rummaged through a small cabinet, hyper-aware of the stranger's presence in her space. When she turned back, she noticed something that had been obscured before beneath the sleeve of his thermal shirt. The unmistakable edge of a Patek Philippe watch glinted in the firelight, incongruously luxurious against his otherwise ordinary appearance. Robert caught her staring and subtly adjusted his sleeve to cover the timepiece. His face betrayed nothing, but Morgan recognized the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to hiding their thoughts. She'd seen that same careful blankness in corporate boardrooms during her previous life. "Why are you on this road?" Morgan set a mug of steaming tea on the coffee table, keeping her distance. "There's been storm warnings for days. The main highway closed yesterday." Robert looked up from his son, his expression measured. "We were trying to reach my mother's place on Lake Placid. GPS rerouted us when the highway closed. Then the car started making noises. By the time we pulled over, the engine wouldn't start again." The explanation sounded reasonable enough, but something in his delivery struck Morgan as carefully constructed. Truth wrapped in omission. Lake Placid is still 30 miles north. Morgan crossed her arms, studying the man's reaction. "Bad place for your car to break down." Robert nodded, his attention returning to Tyler as the boy stirred restlessly. "Bad timing all around." His hand gently brushed the child's forehead, checking his temperature with practiced familiarity. "He's burning up." Morgan's professional instincts overrode her suspicion. She approached cautiously, keeping the poker within reach as she knelt to examine the boy. His forehead radiated heat against her palm, cheeks flushed crimson against otherwise pale skin. "I have ibuprofen. It will help with the fever. Do you know if he's allergic to any medications?" "No allergies." Robert's response came quickly, confidently, a father who knew his child's medical history. Morgan retrieved the medicine along with the clean washcloth she dampened with cool water. She demonstrated the proper dosage before handing the medicine cup to Robert, maintaining her boundary. After Tyler swallowed the medicine with a grimace, Morgan showed Robert how to place the cool cloth on his son's forehead. "Keep this on for 15 minutes, then let his skin breathe for 5. Repeat. It helps draw out the heat." Robert followed her instructions with meticulous care, his movements revealing a practiced tenderness that suggested this wasn't his first time caring for his ill child alone. The observation softened something in Morgan's rigid posture, though her wariness remained intact. "Thank you," Robert's voice carried genuine gratitude. "He's everything to me." The simple declaration, spoken not for sympathy but as plain fact, resonated against Morgan's carefully constructed walls. She retreated to the kitchen area, putting physical distance between herself and the emotion those 5 words had stirred. The kettle whistled shrilly. Morgan busied herself making a simple chicken broth from bouillon cubes. The familiar task anchored her to the present as her mind tried to reconcile the contradictions presented by her unexpected guests, the expensive watch versus the worn hiking boots, the articulate speech versus the rugged appearance, the evident love for his son versus the recklessness of traveling in a blizzard with a sick child. "I'm making soup," Morgan announced without turning around. "Nothing fancy, just something warm." The floorboards creaked as Robert shifted his weight. "You don't have to feed us. We're imposing enough already. You're already here. Might as well be useful while I wait for you to leave." Morgan's words carried more edge than intended, her discomfort with the situation manifesting as sharpness. From the couch came another round of coughing, followed by a small, pitiful voice. "Daddy, it hurts." Robert immediately returned to his son, his focus complete and undivided. "I know, buddy. Try to take small breaths, remember?" Like we practiced. Morgan watched from the periphery as Robert demonstrated slow breathing for Tyler, the man's face a study in contained worry as he maintained a calm exterior for his son's benefit. The scene struck a chord Morgan had thought long-severed memories of her own father's steady presence during childhood illnesses of safety found in capable hands. She brought over 2 mugs of broth, the steam carrying the simple scent of comfort. You should both try to get something warm inside you. Robert accepted the offering with a nod of thanks, helping Tyler sit up enough to sip from the mug. The boy managed a few swallows before fatigue pulled his eyelids downward. Within minutes, he had drifted into restless sleep. In the quiet that followed the storm outside, seemed to intensify wind screaming around the cabin's corners. Morgan lit 2 candles from her emergency supplies, placing them on the coffee table to supplement the fire's glow. The small flames cast strange shadows across Robert's face, highlighting the exhaustion etched around his eyes. This isn't what I had planned for tonight. Morgan's statement hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor acceptance. Robert ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair, the gesture unconsciously revealing the watch again. I'm sorry for disrupting your evening. Believe me, this wasn't in my plans either. A gust of wind rattled the windows with particular ferocity, punctuating his words. Both adults glanced toward the glass panes, then back at each other, momentary co-conspirators against the elements. Morgan settled into the armchair opposite the couch, maintaining her vigil. You don't look like the kind of man who ends up stranded in a snowstorm. The observation slipped out before she could filter it. Robert's eyebrow arched slightly, the first hint of something beyond polite gratitude crossing his features. What kind of man do I look like? The kind who wears a watch worth more than this entire cabin while claiming to be lost on a back road. Morgan met his gaze, directly challenging him to deny it. Robert's fingers unconsciously brushed the timepiece, his expression shuddering briefly before he sighed. It was a gift from Tyler's mother. I don't wear it for its value. The answer wasn't what Morgan expected. The mention of Tyler's mother, notably in past tense, shifted her perspective slightly, though suspicion remained her default. She watched as Robert checked on his son again, adjusting the cool cloth with gentle precision. He looks like you. Morgan's observation was clinical, noting the same shaped nose, the dark eyebrows that furrowed in concentration. Robert's expression softened imperceptibly. He has her eyes, though, and her stubbornness. The quiet that followed wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Morgan found herself studying her unexpected guest more carefully, the way he maintained a protective posture, even while seated, how his attention remained divided between his surroundings and his son, the slight calluses on his hands that suggested he wasn't a stranger to physical work, despite the expensive watch. The night deepened around them, minutes stretching into hours, marked only by the methodical addition of logs to the fire and the periodic changing of the cool cloth on Tyler's forehead. Morgan maintained her vigil from the armchair, refusing to sleep, while strangers occupied her home. Robert seemed equally determined to remain awake, though exhaustion clearly pulled at him. Around midnight, Tyler's fever broke. His breathing eased, the flush receding from his cheeks as sweat dampened his hairline. Robert's relief was palpable, his shoulders dropping slightly as he pressed his lips to his son's forehead to confirm the temperature change. The fever's down. Morgan stated the obvious, needing to fill the silence that had settled between them. Robert nodded, something vulnerable crossing his features before disappearing behind composure. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if he didn't complete the thought, but he didn't need to. The specter of what might have happened had they remained in the car hung unspoken between them. You should get some sleep. Morgan nodded toward the second couch across from where Tyler rested. I'll keep the fire going. Robert hesitated, clearly torn between exhaustion and vigilance. You've already done enough. I can stay awake. You're no good to him, exhausted. Morgan's tone brooked no argument, her professional voice resurfacing. I don't sleep much anyway. Robert studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something written in a language he only partially understood. Then he nodded, settling onto the second couch, while maintaining a position that allowed him clear sight lines to both his son and the cabin's entrance. Even in repose, he remained a guardian. Morgan wrapped herself in a thick blanket, positioning her chair where she could observe both the fire and her unexpected guests. Despite her determination to remain alert, Morgan found her eyelids growing heavy as the night deepened. She jerked awake sometime later, disoriented and immediately tense. The fire had burned lower, though someone had added a log recently. Robert stood at the window, his silhouette outlined against the glass as he spoke in hushed tones into a cell phone. Morgan remained motionless, straining to hear his words. I understand the implications. Robert's voice was different now. Authoritative, precise, carrying an unmistakable note of command. Transfer the funds as discussed. Secure the documents. I'll handle the board. Morgan's suspicion flared anew. The phone conversation suggested business dealings, possibly significant ones, given the mention of a board. The contrast between the concerned father tending his sick child and this commanding figure issuing directives in the middle of the night was jarring. Robert ended the call, his posture immediately shifting back to its previous state, shoulders slightly hunched, movements more contained. He turned from the window and froze when he saw Morgan awake watching him. "You have cell service." Morgan's statement hung in the air between them, accusatory in its simplicity. Robert slipped the phone into his pocket. It came back briefly. "1 bar. Enough for a quick call. Who needs funds transferred at 2 in the morning during a blizzard?" Morgan stood, blanket falling away as she faced him directly. Robert's expression closed like a steel trap. "Business that couldn't wait. Nothing that concerns you." "Business. Right." Morgan's laugh held no humor. "Let me guess, you're not really headed to your mother's place, are you?" A muscle ticked in Robert's jaw. The only indication that her words had landed, Tyler stirred on the couch, momentarily diverting both adults' attention. When he looked back at Morgan, his expression had softened slightly. "My mother is expecting us. That much is true. The rest is complicated." Complicated. Morgan repeated the word, infusing it with all her skepticism. "Is Tyler actually sick? Or was that part of your act too?" Robert's response was immediate, his voice low but intense. "Don't ever suggest I would use my son's health as a manipulation. Whatever you might think of me, Tyler's well-being is my priority. Always." The vehemence in his tone carried conviction Morgan couldn't dismiss. She'd interviewed enough parents in crisis to recognize genuine concern, and Robert's devotion to his son appeared unimpeachable. Then explain the watch, the secret phone call, the way you adjust your speech when you think I'm not paying attention. Morgan crossed her arms, holding her ground. "Who are you really, Robert?" Robert considered her for a long moment, calculation visible behind his eyes. Then he sighed, shoulders dropping fractionally. "My name is Robert Thorne. Does that mean anything to you?" Morgan searched her memory, the name vaguely familiar but not immediately placing it. Should it? A ghost of a smile crossed Robert's face there and gone in an instant. Some people would recognize it. I prefer when they don't. The name suddenly clicked into place. Robert Thorne, CEO of Thorne Technologies, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. His face occasionally appeared in business publications, though he was known for being intensely private. Morgan remembered reading something about him before her life imploded. Something about his rise from middle-class beginnings to billionaire status before age 40. "You're that Robert Thorne." Morgan didn't phrase it as a question. The tech magnate, the billionaire, those are labels, not who I am. Robert returned to the couch, sitting beside his sleeping son. "But yes, that's me in the business pages." The revelation reconfigured Morgan's understanding of the situation entirely. No longer was Robert a suspicious stranger with incongruous possessions, but rather a man of immense wealth and power who for some reason had ended up at her remote cabin door during a blizzard. Why would someone like you be driving through a storm on back roads? Why not wait it out in some luxury hotel? Or fly private? Morgan's questions tumbled out, pieces refusing to align in her mind. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone she now knew commanded a corporate empire. Sometimes the trappings of wealth become a prison. "I needed to get Tyler away from a difficult situation." Quietly. "Is someone after you?" Morgan kept her voice low, glancing at the sleeping child. "Not physically." Robert's smile held no warmth. "But in my world, reputation and control are the real currencies. I'm in the middle of a corporate situation, one that's become unpleasantly personal." He didn't elaborate further, but his gaze drifted to Tyler. The implication clear: whatever situation he faced, he was protecting his son from its effects. The fire crackled between them, consuming another log as the night deepened. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, snow accumulating against the windows in drifts. "So you're running away?" Morgan's question carried no judgment, merely curiosity. Robert shook his head slightly. "Strategic retreat. There's a difference." The clarification revealed something fundamental about him, a man accustomed to controlling narratives, to reframing situations to his advantage. Morgan wondered how much of his life was viewed through that lens of strategic calculation. I used to know people like you. Morgan settled back into her chair, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. In my previous life. Robert's eyebrow arched questioningly, but he didn't press. Instead, he offered an observation of his own. You're not what I expected to find at the end of that road either. The night progressed slowly, conversation ebbing and flowing naturally between periods of comfortable silence. Morgan learned that Tyler had lost his mother to cancer when he was just 2, leaving Robert to navigate single parenthood alongside his corporate responsibilities. Robert discovered that Morgan kept beehives during the warmer months, selling small batch honey at the local farmer's market under a pseudonym. Neither revealed their complete stories, but the fragments shared constructed a bridge of understanding that neither had anticipated. As dawn approached, Morgan found herself less convinced of Robert's potential threat, though wariness remained her default state. The first gray light of morning filtered through snow-rimmed windows, casting the cabin in a ghostly glow. Tyler stirred on the couch, eyes fluttering open as he registered the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, confusion clouded his features before he located his father nearby. "Daddy, where are we?" Robert moved immediately to his son's side, his voice gentle. "Remember, our car stopped working in the snow. This nice lady let us stay in her cabin for the night. How are you feeling, buddy?" Tyler considered the question with childish seriousness, taking internal inventory. "My throat still hurts, but not as bad." His gaze traveled to Morgan, studying her with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Are you a forest fairy? My book says they live in cabins in the woods." The unexpected question startled a genuine laugh from Morgan, the sound foreign to her own ears after so many months of solitude and guardedness. "No, definitely not a fairy. Just a regular person who lives here." Tyler's eyes widened with interest. "By yourself, aren't you scared of wolves or bears?" Morgan found herself responding to the child's genuine curiosity with more openness than she'd shown his father. "Sometimes I hear wolves, but they're more scared of me than I am of them." Robert watched the exchange with interest, something unreadable passing across his features as Morgan continued answering Tyler's increasingly imaginative questions about forest life. The ease with which she engaged with his son revealed a warmth that her interactions with Robert had only hinted at a capacity for connection she kept carefully guarded. The morning progressed slowly, the storm showing no signs of abating. If anything, the wind had intensified, howling around the cabin's corners with renewed determination. Morgan checked her weather radio, the static-filled broadcast confirming what was already apparent through the windows. The blizzard was settling in for at least another 24 hours, roads impassable and emergency services overwhelmed. "You'll have to stay another day." Morgan delivered this news with carefully constructed neutrality, though the prospect of extended cohabitation with strangers disturbed her hard-won solitude. Robert absorbed this information with a slight nod, neither pleased nor particularly distressed by the development. "We'll try to stay out of your way as much as possible." Morgan gestured around the small cabin with a wry smile. "Not much out of the way to be had in here." The observation drew a genuine smile from Robert, brief but transformative. The expression softened his features, revealing a glimpse of someone younger, less burdened than the calculating businessman or vigilant father. Morgan found herself momentarily disarmed by the authenticity of it before reminding herself that charm was often the most effective mask worn by those with something to hide. The day established its own rhythm necessity, creating a tentative domesticity as the 3 occupants navigated the cabin's limited space. Morgan showed Robert where she stored extra firewood, surprised by his competence in maintaining the fire. For a man of his wealth and position, he displayed unexpected practical knowledge, splitting additional logs with precise strokes when the indoor supply ran low, adjusting the flue to maximize heat while minimizing smoke. Tyler's condition improved steadily throughout the morning, his color returning to normal as the fever remained at bay. By midday, he was sitting up on the couch, eagerly accepting the simple oatmeal Morgan prepared on the wood stove. His natural exuberance emerged as he recovered, filling the cabin with chatter that formed a counterpoint to the storm's constant presence. "Do you live here all year?" Even in summer, Tyler spooned another mouthful of oatmeal, eyes bright with curiosity. Morgan nodded, finding it easier to engage with the child's straightforward questions than navigate the complex undercurrents of interaction with his father. "All year round. It's much greener in summer, lots of wildflowers and birds." Tyler considered this information seriously. We have a big apartment in the city, on the very top floor. I can see Central Park, but I'm not allowed to go there by myself. The casual reference to what was undoubtedly a multi-million-dollar penthouse contrasted sharply with the boy's matter-of-fact delivery. Morgan glanced at Robert, who was examining a leaking windowsill with focused attention, seemingly unconcerned by his son's revelations. That sounds like a nice place to live. Morgan kept her tone conversational, though her mind cataloged these additional details about her unexpected guests. Tyler shook his head emphatically. It's boring. Dad's always working. And Miss Peterson doesn't let me play with my loud toys inside. Robert rejoined them, sitting beside his son with a gentle nudge. Miss Peterson is just doing her job, buddy. And I've been trying to work less. Remember, the exchange revealed more layers to their dynamic. A busy father balancing corporate responsibilities with parenthood, a child cared for by staff while longing for more direct attention, wealth providing material comfort, but not necessarily fulfilling more fundamental needs. As the day progressed, Morgan found herself increasingly drawn into interaction despite her initial resolve to maintain distance. When Tyler complained of boredom after exhausting the few books Morgan kept in the cabin, she surprised herself by retrieving a deck of cards from a kitchen drawer, teaching him simple games that soon had him giggling with delight. Robert observed their interaction with quiet attention, occasionally joining a game, but more often using the time to check the windows and doors, reinforcing the cabin against the storm's continued assault. His practical assistance, fixing a long broken cabinet hinge, adjusting a drafty door, emerged naturally without discussion or fanfare. By mid-afternoon, a peculiar comfort had established itself within the cabin walls. Morgan found herself relaxing fractionally, her vigilance easing, as hour after hour passed without her initial fears being realized. Robert remained something of an enigma, but his consistent prioritization of his son's welfare gradually convinced her that whatever secrets he harbored, immediate threat to her safety wasn't among them. The storm intensified as daylight began to fade, wind driving snow horizontally past the windows with renewed vengeance. The temperature inside the cabin dropped noticeably despite the fire's constant burn, prompting Morgan to retrieve additional blankets from the small bedroom at the back of the house. We should conserve the firewood. Morgan draped a thick quilt around Tyler's shoulders. The forecast said the storm might last another full day. Robert nodded, expression thoughtful as he assessed their situation. Do you have enough supplies? Food, medicine, essentials. The question caught Morgan off guard, not because of its content, but because of the genuine concern it conveyed. For most of her adult life, she had been the one asking such questions of others, the social worker, ensuring clients' basic needs were met during crisis. Being on the receiving end of such consideration felt strange, almost uncomfortable. I'm fine. Morgan's response came more sharply than intended. I prepare for winter. Always have extra. Robert didn't push, merely nodded acknowledgement. Smart. Most people underestimate what they'll need. As evening settled around them, Morgan prepared a simple meal of pasta with canned sauce supplemented by dried herbs from her summer garden. The domestic activity felt surreal with others present in her space, transforming her usual solitary routine into something she barely recognized. Tyler insisted on helping, carefully stirring the sauce with exaggerated concentration, while Robert set the small table with an efficiency that suggested he wasn't entirely unfamiliar with such tasks, despite his wealth. They ate by candlelight, the electricity still absent as the storm raged outside. Tyler regaled them with elaborate stories about his school adventures, his expressive face animated in the flickering light. Morgan found herself smiling, despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, the child's unguarded enthusiasm infectious. After dinner, Tyler retrieved a notebook and colored pencils from his backpack, settling on the floor near the fire to draw with intense focus. Morgan cleared the dishes, hyper-aware of Robert's presence as he helped dry each item and return it to its proper place. Their hands brushed accidentally as he reached for a plate, the brief contact sending an unexpected jolt through Morgan's carefully maintained composure. You have calluses, Morgan observed, noting the roughened patches on his otherwise well-maintained hands. Unexpected for a tech CEO. Robert glanced down at his palms with a faint smile. I restore vintage motorcycles. Helps me think. The hobby seemed incongruous with his public image, yet somehow aligned with the practical capability he demonstrated throughout their confinement. Morgan filed this information away, another piece in the increasingly complex puzzle of Robert Thorne. Tyler's voice interrupted their exchange, bright with accomplishment. Look what I made. He held up his drawing proudly, a childish but recognizable rendering of the cabin surrounded by swirling snow. Three figures stood in the doorway. A tall man, a small boy, and between them a woman with golden hair that extended well beyond the proportions of her body. Above the cabin he had drawn a bright sun breaking through clouds. "That's us when the storm stops," Tyler explained earnestly. "And that's you, Morgan. You're helping us not be cold." Morgan accepted the drawing with unexpected emotion tightening her throat. The simple depiction of herself as helper rather than victim, as someone with agency and value, struck a chord she'd thought long silenced. For 2 years she had defined herself by what she'd lost: career, reputation, trust. Tyler's innocent perspective offered a different reflection, one she barely recognized but desperately needed. "Thank you, Tyler. It's beautiful." Morgan's voice emerged steadier than she felt. "I'll keep it safe." The boy beamed, pleased by her approval, before turning to his father. "Can I put it on the wall, Dad? So Morgan won't forget us when we leave." Robert met Morgan's eyes over his son's head, something unspoken passing between them. Acknowledgement of the temporary nature of their connection, of the separate lives that waited beyond the storm. "Sure, buddy, if Morgan doesn't mind." Morgan nodded permission, watching as Robert helped Tyler carefully tape the drawing to the cabin wall. The simple domestic scene, father and son engaged in such ordinary interaction, contrasted sharply with what she knew of Robert's public persona. The billionaire tech magnate who commanded corporate empires and moved markets now stood in sock feet in her modest cabin, patiently helping his son position a crayon drawing at precisely the right height. As the evening deepened into night, Tyler's energy finally waned. He fell asleep on the couch, curled beneath blankets, with one hand still clutching a colored pencil. Robert gently removed the drawing supplies, tucking the blanket more securely around his son's shoulders with practiced care. "He sleeps deeply once he's out." Robert kept his voice low as he rejoined Morgan near the fire. Even as a baby, he could sleep through anything. His mother used to joke that a marching band could parade through his room and he wouldn't stir. The mention of Tyler's mother, rare in their conversations thus far, caught Morgan's attention. She appears in his stories often. Tyler's mom. Robert's expression shifted, something vulnerable crossing his features before being carefully contained. He doesn't actually remember her. Not really. He was too young when she died. But I tell him stories every night. I don't want him to forget she existed, even if he can't remember her himself. The admission revealed more than perhaps Robert intended: his determination to preserve his late wife's presence in their lives, the nightly ritual of storytelling as both memorial and connection. Morgan recognized the depth of grief that fueled such dedication. "That's a gift you are giving him." Morgan's response emerged without calculation, genuine appreciation for his parenting, transcending her usual guardedness. Robert studied the flames, firelight casting his profile in sharp relief. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it for him or for myself. Selfish, maybe." The self-doubt humanized him further, cracking the polished veneer of corporate confidence to reveal the uncertain parent beneath. Morgan found herself responding to this vulnerability, professional training and personal empathy converging. Grief isn't selfish, neither is remembering. Morgan's voice carried the weight of professional conviction, though she carefully avoided sharing how intimately she understood the process of rebuilding after loss. Different kind of loss, but similar mechanisms. Robert looked up, something shifting in his expression as he studied her. "You speak from experience. Professional or personal?" "Both." Morgan's admission surprised even herself, the single word revealing more than she'd intended. She quickly redirected. "You said Tyler was 2 when his mother died. Cancer you mentioned." Robert allowed the deflection, recognizing her boundaries. "Aggressive form of leukemia. Diagnosed during pregnancy, but she refused treatment until after Tyler was born. By then," he trailed off, the conclusion obvious, 9 years this spring. The timeline explained much about their dynamic: Tyler growing up with only his father's consistent presence, Robert learning to navigate both parenthood and grief simultaneously, their bond forged through shared loss, even if Tyler was too young to fully comprehend it at the time. She must have been remarkable. Morgan offered the observation without platitude, recognizing the truth of it in Robert's dedication to preserving her memory. Robert smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his usual reserve. Catherine was incandescent. Brilliant engineer, terrible cook, laughed like she was surprised by her own joy every time. She would have raised Tyler differently, more adventure, less structure. I sometimes wonder if I'm too cautious with him trying to protect him from everything. The next morning dawned with surprising brilliance, sunshine refracting through ice-laden branches to cast prismatic patterns across the snow-blanketed clearing. Tyler woke early, instantly energized by the winter wonderland visible through the windows. "Can we build a snowman?" "Please, Dad." His pleading gaze shifted between his father and Morgan, hope radiating from his expression. When Morgan nodded permission, Tyler's whoop of joy filled the small cabin, his enthusiasm infectious enough to draw reluctant smiles from both adults. They bundled against the cold Tyler in his own winter gear, supplemented by Morgan's thick wool socks, as additional insulation Robert in his now-dried clothes. Outside, the world sparkled with pristine beauty, the storm's violence transformed into crystalline stillness. Morgan found herself drawn into their play, despite her usual reserve helping Tyler roll increasingly large snow spheres, while Robert sculpted features from twigs and stones. The simple joy of creation in the crisp morning air awakened something long dormant within her, the capacity for uncomplicated pleasure, for connection without calculation. As they worked, Tyler chattered continuously, imagination transforming their snowman into an elaborate character with complex backstory. The snow sentinel would guard the cabin, he explained seriously, keeping watch for wolves and bears and bad guys while they slept. Morgan caught Robert's gaze over Tyler's head, both adults sharing silent appreciation for the child's innocent belief in protection so easily constructed. Later, as they returned inside with cheeks flushed from cold and exertion, Robert's attention shifted to practical matters. "We should check the car, see if we can get it running." The mention of potential departure shifted the morning's light-hearted atmosphere reality, intruding on their temporary sanctuary. Morgan felt an unexpected twist of emotion at the prospect, not the relief she would have anticipated days earlier, but something more complex that she refused to examine too closely. "I have some basic tools." Morgan moved toward practical assistance, retreating to the emotional safety of tangible problems and concrete solutions. "We should clear a path to the road first." They worked together efficiently, Robert and Morgan shoveling snow, while Tyler supervised with the serious concentration of a child granted important responsibility. The physical labor provided natural buffer against the emotional undercurrents, giving structure to the approaching transition. When they finally reached the car, a surprisingly modest SUV, rather than the luxury vehicle Morgan might have expected, Robert unlocked it and popped the hood with the confidence of someone familiar with basic mechanics. Morgan stood beside him as he examined the engine, their breath forming twin clouds in the cold air. "Battery's dead." Robert's diagnosis came quickly, not surprising after sitting in this cold. "If we had jumper cables in another vehicle." The unfinished sentence hung between them both, recognizing the impossibility of immediate departure given their isolated location. Morgan considered their options, mentally cataloging resources and connections. "There's a mechanic in town who might help. I could try the landline, see if he can get up here once the main roads are plowed." Robert nodded, his expression revealing mixed emotions about this potential solution. Practical relief at addressing the problem, yet something less definable when considering the implications of leaving. They returned to the cabin in thoughtful silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots, as Tyler raced ahead, still captivated by the winter wonderland surrounding them. Inside, Morgan placed the call to Mike Thompson, the local mechanic, explaining the situation with minimal detail. He promised to try reaching them once the county plows cleared the main road, estimating mid-afternoon arrival at earliest. With departure now concretely approaching, a strange tension settled over the cabin, not uncomfortable, but weighted with awareness of ending of transition back to separate realities. Tyler seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere without fully understanding its source. He became increasingly clingy with Morgan, insisting she participate in every activity, seeking her attention with greater determination than before. Morgan found herself unable to refuse his simple requests, drawn into card games and storytelling sessions that created an illusion of normalcy against the backdrop of impending separation. As afternoon progressed, Morgan found herself cataloging details she hadn't previously noted: the precise shade of Robert's eyes when he smiled at his son, the particular sound of Tyler's laugh when genuinely amused, the subtle ways father and son mirrored each other's gestures unconsciously. These observations felt important, somehow worth preserving against the approaching separation. The sound of an engine outside interrupted their card game. Tyler's face fell immediately, understanding that this development accelerated their departure. Robert placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, providing reassurance while acknowledging the reality. Let's go see if Mr. Thompson can help us get the car started. Then we need to thank Morgan properly for all her kindness. They gathered at the front door, watching as Mike's tow truck navigated the final stretch of cleared road. Within 30 minutes, the SUV's battery had been jump-started, the engine running smoothly in the crisp afternoon air. The mechanic departed with cheerful waves, leaving the three of them standing in the snow, the running vehicle symbolic of imminent separation. We should get your belongings together. Morgan broke the silence, practically retreating to the emotional safety of logistics. They returned inside for final preparations, gathering Tyler's drawings and clothing with efficient movements that belied the emotional undercurrents. Robert disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a small envelope that he placed carefully on the counter before collecting their minimal luggage. Within 30 minutes, everything was ready. Their few possessions packed, the borrowed blankets folded neatly, the cabin restored to its previous state, except for Tyler's drawing still taped to the wall, the single visible evidence of their presence. The boy had insisted it remain a talisman against complete erasure of their time together. The moment of departure arrived with inevitable finality. Tyler hugged Morgan fiercely, small arms wrapped around her waist with desperate strength. Thank you for saving us from the snow monster. His childish framing of their experience emerged with complete sincerity. You're the nicest lady ever. Morgan returned his embrace, unexpected emotion tightening her throat as she felt the trust this child had placed in her, unconditional, uncalculated, genuine, in a way adults rarely achieved. You're very welcome, Tyler. Thank you for your beautiful drawings. I'll keep them safe. When he released her and stepped back, Robert moved forward, his expression containing multitudes, gratitude, respect, regret, and something else Morgan couldn't immediately name. I don't know how to adequately thank you. His voice carried genuine emotion beneath the formal words. What you did for us, for Tyler especially, it means more than I can express. Morgan shook her head slightly, uncomfortable with the depth of his gratitude. Anyone would have helped a child in need. Robert's smile held gentle contradiction. We both know that's not true. What you gave us these past days goes beyond shelter from a storm. You showed Tyler kindness when he needed it most, and you showed me. The sentence remained unfinished, implications hovering between them. He extended his hand formally, the gesture somehow bridging the distance between the intimacy they developed and the separate lives that awaited. Morgan accepted the handshake, the brief contact, containing acknowledgement of everything unspoken between them. They departed minutes later, Tyler waving continuously from the car window until they disappeared around the bend in the snow-covered road. Morgan stood on the porch long after they'd gone, watching the empty space where the vehicle had been, feeling the absence they left behind with unexpected acuteness. When she finally returned inside, the cabin's silence pressed against her with new weight. The space seemed smaller, somehow emptier, despite being exactly as it had been before their arrival. Morgan moved through the rooms, restlessly straightening items that needed no adjustment, avoiding the drawing on the wall that represented connection now severed. In the kitchen, her attention finally settled on the envelope Robert had left on the counter. She approached it cautiously, conflicted about its potential contents. The envelope contained no name or message on its exterior, simply sealed with precise care. Morgan opened it with reluctant curiosity, uncertain what final communication Robert might have chosen. Inside lay a black card, sleek, minimalist, heavier than expected. Morgan recognized it immediately as the type of exclusive credit card issued only to the extraordinarily wealthy, the kind that signified unlimited funds, and open doors closed to ordinary citizens. No bank name adorned its surface, only a chip and a sequence of embossed numbers. Beneath the card lay a handwritten note on heavy stationery. For emergencies or opportunities, no strings attached, no expectations, simply recognition of kindness freely given. RT. Morgan stared at the card, emotions churning beneath her carefully maintained composure. The gesture represented something beyond financial assistance, acknowledgement of her circumstances without pity, recognition of potential future needs without presumption, respect for her independence while offering genuine support. Her first instinct was rejection. 2 years of rebuilt self-sufficiency after devastating betrayal had made acceptance of help nearly impossible. Pride and self-protection forming a barricade against vulnerability. Yet something in the simplicity of Robert's note gave her pause. No strings attached, no expectations. The phrasing suggested understanding of her barriers, respect for the boundaries she'd established around her life. Morgan placed the card and note back in the envelope, neither fully accepting nor rejecting the gesture. She would decide later, when emotion wasn't clouding judgment, when she could assess the offer with clear-eyed pragmatism rather than reactive pride or lingering connection. As evening settled around the cabin, Morgan lit the fire more from habit than necessity, the electricity having remained stable since its return. The flames cast familiar patterns across the wooden floor, illuminating Tyler's drawing still affixed to the wall. Three figures standing in a cabin doorway, snow swirling around them, a bright sun breaking through clouds above. Outside, snow began falling again, not the violent blizzard of days past, but gentle flakes drifting lazily through the night air. Morgan watched through the window, remembering Tyler's delight in winter's simple magic, Robert's careful attention to his son's joy. The memory carried unexpected warmth, thawing something long frozen within her. Tomorrow would bring decisions. For tonight, she allowed herself to acknowledge what these past days had awakened, the recognition that safety without connection was its own form of loss, that walls built for protection could become prisons if never opened. The realization didn't demand immediate action, merely contemplation, the seed of possibility planted in soil long left fallow. 2 months passed. Spring crept hesitantly into the mountains, bringing rain instead of snow, mud instead of ice. For Morgan Hayes, the seasonal transformation mirrored the gradual return to her solitary existence. The cabin settled back into its familiar rhythms: silent mornings, uninterrupted evenings, conversations held only with herself or the occasional wildlife visitor. Yet the silence carried new weight, the solitude no longer the comfort it had once been. She touched Tyler's drawing, still pinned to the wall where he had insisted it remain. The colors had faded slightly, sunlight bleaching the vibrancy from the childish rendition of three figures standing before the cabin. Morgan had considered removing it dozens of times, but found herself unable to take that final step toward erasing the evidence of their brief intrusion into her carefully constructed isolation. The black card remained untouched in its envelope, hidden in the back of her kitchen drawer. Morgan had researched it at the town library's limited internet connection, a Centurion card, ultra-exclusive invitation-only, unlimited credit line. The type of financial instrument that occupied a different reality than her dwindling bank account. She had promised herself she wouldn't accept charity from a billionaire with a guilty conscience, but its existence represented possibility she couldn't quite bring herself to eliminate. Raindrops traced lazy patterns down the kitchen window. As Morgan reviewed her finances, at the small table calculator in hand, bills spread before her like battlefield casualties. The situation had deteriorated rapidly over the past month. First came the notice from the library: budget cuts, position eliminated. Then the diner reduced her shifts, tourist season still weeks away from bringing the influx of customers that justified additional staff. The roof had developed a persistent leak that required immediate attention before spring storms caused structural damage. Each financial blow pushed her closer to an edge she had sworn never to approach again: dependence on others, vulnerability to exploitation. Morgan closed the ledger with a decisive snap. She would increase her honey production, take odd jobs in town, repair the roof herself with salvaged materials. Solutions existed. They always had. Even in her darkest days, after Edward Chambers had decimated her life, she had found a way forward without compromising her independence. This was merely another challenge to overcome. The library director's letter arrived the following Tuesday, crisp white envelope, carrying official notification of what Morgan already knew. She scanned the corporate language designed to distance the institution from the human cost of its decisions. Budgetary constraints, necessary staff reductions, valued contribution, regret to inform. The words blurred together, their meaning clear. Despite the careful phrasing, another support beam knocked from beneath the precarious structure of her rebuilt life. Rain intensified outside, finding new paths through the damaged roof, creating rhythmic dripping that echoed through the cabin. Morgan placed pots and buckets strategically, the metallic ping of captured raindrops forming a discordant symphony that mirrored her fragmented thoughts. The cabin had become both sanctuary and prison shelter, and burden representing both her independence and her isolation. The bank notice arrived 3 days later. Mortgage payment, overdue grace period, expired foreclosure proceedings initiated if not resolved within 30 days. Morgan read it twice, the bureaucratic threat materializing in her kitchen like an unwelcome ghost. The cabin, her refuge, her fresh start, her declaration of self-sufficiency, now threatened to become another failure. Another loss, another piece of herself surrendered to circumstance. That night, as rain hammered against the roof and wind whispered through poorly sealed windows, Morgan retrieved the black card from its hiding place. It lay heavy in her palm, obsidian surface reflecting candlelight in distorted patterns. Using it would violate everything she had built since retreating to these mountains. Her independence, her self-reliance, her rejection of the systems and connections that had failed her so completely. Yet losing the cabin would destroy those same principles just as thoroughly. The card represented salvation wrapped in compromise, freedom purchased with invisible strings. Morgan returned it to the drawer untouched, decision deferred, but not resolved. Outside, the storm intensified water. Finding new pathways through the damaged ceiling, the cabin's vulnerabilities exposed by elements it could no longer fully withstand. Morning brought watery sunshine and temporary reprieve from rain. Morgan examined the roof damage from a precarious perch on her ladder, assessing what could be patched immediately versus what required professional attention she couldn't afford. The southeast corner had deteriorated beyond her ability to repair shingles rotted through underlying wood soft with moisture. Estimates she'd received from local contractors started at $3,000, might as well have been $3 million, given her current financial reality. Something caught her eye as she descended the ladder, an envelope wedged against her front door protected from rain by the small overhang. No postal markings, no delivery service labels, simply her name written in formal cursive on heavy cream stationery. Morgan approached cautiously, wariness rising like an old familiar friend. Inside a single sheet of matching paper contained a brief typed message. Summit Enterprises is pleased to invite you to interview for the position of Director Open Door Initiative. Thursday, 10 a.m. New York headquarters. Transportation will be arranged. Please contact the number below to confirm. Morgan read it 3 times, looking for hidden meaning between the carefully formatted lines. Summit Enterprises, Robert Thorne's company. The invitation couldn't be coincidence, not when she had never applied for any position, not when her professional background in social work had been dormant for years. Yet there was no personal message, no acknowledgement of their shared history, nothing to indicate this came from Robert directly, rather than some anonymous corporate recruitment process. A car arrived the following morning exactly as the invitation had indicated, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows and a discreetly uniformed driver who confirmed her identity with professional courtesy. The interior smelled of leather and subtle cologne luxury that made Morgan acutely conscious of her modest clothing and practical shoes selected for the interview. The 3-hour drive from mountain isolation to Manhattan's steel and glass canyons created its own form of vertigo, a physical manifestation of the disorienting transition between worlds. Summit Enterprises occupied 30 floors of a gleaming tower in Midtown, its lobby a cathedral of marble and light security personnel positioned like modern sentinels guarding access to the upper realms. Morgan's name granted immediate passage, the receptionist's practiced smile revealing nothing about the unusual circumstances of her arrival. She was escorted to an express elevator, then to a hushed waiting area on the 32nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered vertiginous views of Central Park and the city beyond. Sometimes the most luxurious prisons have the most spectacular views. The thought materialized unbidden as Morgan stood before the glass, observing the miniaturized city below. Wealth created its own form of isolation, different from her mountain solitude, but perhaps equally constraining in ways invisible to those who hadn't experienced both extremes. A noise behind her caused Morgan to turn, expecting an administrative assistant or corporate functionary. Instead, she found herself facing Tyler, who stared at her with widened eyes before launching himself forward with explosive joy. "Morgan, you came!" The boy collided with her legs, arms wrapping tight around her waist, face turned up with unrestrained delight. "Dad said you might, but I wasn't sure you'd remember us." The spontaneous affection caught Morgan off guard, the child's unconditional welcome breaking through her carefully constructed, professional demeanor. "Of course I remember you. You made me a drawing. I still have it on my wall." Tyler beamed, pleased beyond measure by this confirmation of his importance. "I made lots more drawings. Dad has them in his office." He says they're the best art in the whole building. Want to see? Before Morgan could respond, Tyler had grabbed her hand, tugging her toward a set of imposing double doors at the far end of the waiting area. His unself-conscious physical contact, so different from the carefully negotiated boundaries of adult interaction, reminded Morgan of what had drawn her to social work initially, the directness and honesty children brought to human connection. The doors opened to reveal an expansive corner office where sunlight streamed through windows on two sides. Robert Thorne stood behind a massive desk, corporate armor, fully in place, impeccable, suit, subtle tie, posture radiating authority and control. The man from the cabin had been replaced by the CEO of Public Record, the transformation so complete it momentarily disoriented Morgan. Tyler's enthusiasm cut through the formality instantly. "Dad, she came just like you said, and she kept my drawing on her wall." Robert's corporate mask slipped slightly, genuine warmth breaking through as he regarded his son's excitement. He crossed the room with measured steps, stopping at a professionally appropriate distance. His expression revealed complex emotions: pleasure at the reunion, uncertainty about her response, awareness of the power imbalance inherent in their current setting. "Thank you for coming." The words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested. "I wasn't sure you would." The black card didn't convince me. Morgan maintained direct eye contact, refusing to be intimidated by either wealth or position. "I'm here because I'm curious what kind of job requires a personal chauffeur, but no actual application." Robert acknowledged her directness with a slight nod. "Unconventional recruitment for an unconventional position. The role we're discussing doesn't exist yet. You would help create it." He gestured toward a sitting area near the windows where comfortable chairs had been arranged around a low table. Tyler had already settled into one, swinging his legs as he retrieved a tablet from beneath the table and immersed himself in a game with practiced ease, though his attention remained partially on the adults. "When we stayed with you, Tyler mentioned something that resonated with me." Robert began once they were seated. "He said your cabin felt more like home than our apartment. I've been thinking about that observation ever since." Morgan remained silent, waiting rather than filling the space with words. Robert continued, his corporate polish momentarily receding as he leaned forward. "I've been rebuilding Thorne Technologies since my wife died, focusing on innovation, market share, shareholder value, all the things that define success in my industry." Tyler's comment made me realize I've neglected a more fundamental measure: what our technology actually does to improve lives, especially for those without resources or connections. The Open Door Initiative would address that gap, a foundation focusing on housing stability, emergency shelter, and support services for vulnerable families, particularly single parents and children in crisis. "Morgan, I want you to develop and lead it. Your background in social work combined with what I witnessed firsthand in your cabin, that's exactly the perspective this initiative needs." Morgan absorbed this information, professional interest automatically analyzing the proposal's viability, even as personal caution flagged the underlying complications. "Why me? There are thousands of social workers with current credentials, active professional networks, and no 2-year gap in their employment history. People who haven't been living in semi-isolation in the mountains." Robert's expression shifted, calculation visible behind his eyes as he measured how much to reveal. "None of them opened their door during a blizzard to a stranger and his sick child. None of them created safety and connection in the middle of a crisis without compromising their boundaries or values. None of them refused to use a black card that could have solved their financial problems instantly because principles mattered more than convenience." Morgan stared at him, understanding dawning with cold clarity. The card was a test. Robert didn't deny it. "One I expected you to fail, if I'm being completely honest. Most people would have used it within days. The fact that you didn't tells me everything about your character, the calculation behind his actions, the deliberate assessment, the test of her integrity, the surveillance implied by his knowledge of her financial struggles, sent anger flaring through Morgan's carefully maintained composure. "So you've been monitoring me, watching me struggle financially while you waited to see if I'd use your little moral litmus test. I've been respecting your independence." Robert's voice remained even, despite the intensity of her reaction. "The card was an option, not an obligation. This job offer is the same. Your choice entirely." Tyler looked up from his game, sensing the tension between the adults. "Are you angry at Dad?" His question carried childish directness, cutting through professional veneer to the emotional undercurrent. Morgan moderated her tone, acutely aware of the child's presence. Not angry, just surprised by some of his methods. Dad says you might help people find homes when they don't have any, like when we didn't have anywhere to go in the snow. Tyler's observation demonstrated more awareness of adult conversations than either had realized. That would be really good. Lots of kids need that. His simple framing of the initiative's purpose punctured Morgan's indignation, redirecting attention to the potential impact rather than the convoluted path that had led to this moment. Professional interest overcame personal caution as Morgan refocused on the proposal itself. What exactly would this role involve? Practical questions provided safer ground than emotional reactions. Budget autonomy reporting structure. Robert shifted smoothly into business mode, outlining parameters that grew increasingly impressive as he continued. Full autonomy over program development. Initial budget of $20 million scaling up based on demonstrated impact. Direct reporting to Robert himself with board oversight but not interference. Office space support staff and resources as needed. Salary commensurate with executive leadership positions in the nonprofit sector, plus relocation assistance if desired. The scope exceeded anything Morgan had encountered in her previous career, representing influence and impact beyond what most social workers achieved in a lifetime. The opportunity to design interventions without constant resource constraints, to implement best practices without bureaucratic interference, to potentially transform thousands of lives through systemic approaches rather than individual band-aids, the professional appeal was undeniable. Yet beneath the glossy proposal complications lurked like underwater currents, the blurred lines between professional opportunity and personal connection, the power imbalance inherent in their history and current positions, the unspoken but evident attachment Tyler had formed during their brief acquaintance, the complex motivations driving Robert's creation of this initiative and his selection of Morgan to lead it. I'll need to think about it. Morgan's response acknowledged both the opportunity and her reservations. This isn't a decision I can make immediately. Robert nodded, accepting this boundary without pressure. Take whatever time you need, the position will remain open. Their meeting concluded with professional courtesy, masking the personal undercurrents. Robert arranged for Morgan to tour the proposed foundation space, an entire floor currently under renovation, the blank canvas awaiting her vision if she accepted. The scale of resources being committed to this initiative impressed even Morgan's skepticism, suggesting Robert's commitment extended beyond guilt or obligation into genuine investment in transformational change. The car returned her to the cabin that evening, the transition between Manhattan's corporate heights and Adirondack isolation creating cognitive dissonance that matched Morgan's internal conflict. The opportunity represented professional redemption, financial security, and meaningful impact. Yet accepting meant entering Robert's orbit, navigating complex boundaries, and potentially compromising the independence she had rebuilt so carefully after Edward Chambers's devastation. Rain greeted her return, water now streaming through the damaged roof in steady rivulets rather than occasional drips. The physical deterioration of her sanctuary paralleled the erosion of her certainty about remaining isolated. Morgan placed buckets under the worst leaks, the metallic rhythm of captured raindrops underscoring her restless thoughts as she paced the small living room. 3 days later, Morgan stood before her bathroom mirror, adjusting unfamiliar professional attire retrieved from storage boxes untouched since her departure from Manhattan. The reflection showed someone between identities, the social worker she had been, the recluse she had become, the foundation director she might yet be. She had called the number provided, accepted the position with the conditions preserving her autonomy, agreed to start immediately given the urgency of her housing situation. The sedan arrived precisely on schedule, whisking her toward a future she had never anticipated when she first opened her door to strangers in a snowstorm. Morgan watched the cabin recede through the rear window, uncertain whether this departure represented escape or abandonment, progress or capitulation. The black card remained in her kitchen drawer, unused but not forgotten, a symbol of the complex intersection between independence and isolation, assistance and control. Manhattan's energy engulfed her upon arrival, the city's constant motion and noise, a stark contrast to mountain solitude. Summit Enterprises provided temporary corporate housing until she found her own apartment, a luxury residence with doorman concierge service, and views that made her mountain vista seem provincial by comparison. The opulence felt foreign after years of deliberate simplicity, comfort bordering on discomfort through its very excess. Morgan's first week as director of the Open Door Initiative proved both exhilarating and disorienting. She navigated corporate protocols while asserting nonprofit values, built relationships with wary executives, while establishing independent authority translated between worlds she had once traversed with professional ease, but now approached as a near stranger. Robert maintained professional distance, their interactions limited to scheduled meetings where Tyler's presence often provided welcome buffer against unspoken personal complexity. The foundation staff grew quickly as Morgan recruited experienced professionals from her previous networks. Her reputation had survived her absence, her expertise respected despite her years of retreat. The work itself provided grounding amid the transition, familiar problems of resource allocation, service design, and needs assessment, creating continuity between past and present professional identities. Complications emerged with predictable swiftness. Margaret Thorne Roberts, sister and company vice president, made her opposition clear during the first executive committee meeting, where Morgan presented the initiative's strategic framework. This represents an unprecedented departure from our core business. Margaret's critique came wrapped in corporate courtesy, but landed with undisguised skepticism. Technology innovation drives our market position and shareholder value. Habitat for Humanity with a thorn logo adds nothing to either. The dismissal carried underlying accusation that the initiative represented Robert's personal project rather than corporate strategy, that Morgan's position stemmed from connection rather than qualification. Morgan recognized the dynamic immediately, having navigated similar political currents in previous roles where her expertise faced challenge from those with different priorities. With respect, you're misunderstanding both the initiative's purpose and its potential value to Thorne Technologies. Morgan maintained professional composure, meeting Margaret's challenge directly. This isn't charity with a corporate logo. It's strategic investment in technology applications that address fundamental human needs while building brand association with social responsibility. The market increasingly demands ethical leadership from technology companies. This initiative positions Thorne at the forefront of that movement rather than trailing competitors. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees as executives shifted attention between the women. Robert remained notably silent, neither supporting nor contradicting Morgan's assertion of authority. His neutrality represented its own test whether she could establish credibility independently rather than relying on his endorsement. That's a creative rationalization for what appears to be a vanity project. Margaret's smile carried professional polish without warmth. The board has approved initial funding, but ongoing support will require demonstrated ROI beyond feel-good publicity. The exchange established battle lines that would define Morgan's early tenure. Margaret represented institutional resistance to change, protection of established priorities, skepticism toward initiatives without direct profit contribution. Morgan faced the challenge of proving value within corporate metrics while maintaining the initiative's integrity and social impact focus. The conflict extended beyond committee meetings into operational realities. Office space allocation suddenly faced unexpected delays. Technology support requests encountered bureaucratic hurdles. Recruitment efforts for key positions mysteriously stalled. Each obstacle carried plausible deniability, but collectively created pattern-revealing coordinated resistance. Morgan addressed these challenges without complaint, applying the same resourcefulness that had sustained her mountain independence to corporate navigation. She cultivated allies within the organization, identified alternative pathways around roadblocks, demonstrated flexibility, while maintaining firm boundaries around core priorities. The skills that had once helped vulnerable families navigate broken systems now served her own professional survival. Tyler provided unexpected support during this period, his frequent appearances at the foundation offices, creating informal connections across organizational boundaries. The boys' enthusiasm for the initiative manifested in crayon drawings of houses being built, families finding shelter, children playing in safe spaces. His artwork adorned Morgan's office walls, visual reminders of the human impact behind corporate strategies and political maneuvering. Robert maintained professional distance during business hours, their interaction limited to scheduled meetings and corporate functions, where personal history remained carefully unacknowledged. Yet his support manifested in practical ways, expedited approvals when bureaucracy threatened key timelines, strategic introductions to potential partners and funders, quiet reinforcement of Morgan's authority when challenged indirectly. Complexity emerged after hours when professional boundaries blurred into personal territories. Tyler's attachment to Morgan grew rather than diminished with proximity, his request for her participation in evening activities and weekend outings, creating situations where refusal would disappoint the child, but acceptance complicated the adult relationship. Morgan navigated these waters carefully, establishing boundaries that protected all parties, while acknowledging the genuine connection that had formed during those snowbound days. The foundation's launch approached with increasing momentum, renovation of the dedicated floor nearing completion, initial programs designed and staffed, community partnerships established with key service organizations. Morgan's vision had materialized with remarkable speed, corporate resources accelerating implementation that would have required years in traditional nonprofit settings. The professional satisfaction of seeing concept transform into tangible reality provided counterbalance to the personal complexities of her position. 2 months into her tenure as Morgan worked late, finalizing details for the official announcement event, Victoria Chen appeared in her office doorway. As Robert's executive assistant, Victoria represented the gatekeeper to his attention and resources, her efficiency and discretion legendary within the organization. Her unexpected presence in the foundation offices after hours signaled message too sensitive for email or subordinate delivery. He's making a mistake, and someone needs to tell him directly. Victoria's opening carried no preamble, professional courtesy compressed by apparent urgency. This isn't the first time his personal feelings have clouded his business judgment, but it's potentially the most expensive. Morgan set aside her documents, meeting the challenge directly. If you have concerns about the foundation's budget or strategic alignment, I'm happy to address them through proper channels. If you're here to discuss something else, I suggest you speak plainly. Victoria's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern beneath the corporate politics. Catherine's death nearly destroyed him. Tyler became his entire world, his only emotional connection. Now you've somehow broken through that isolation, become important to both of them. That creates vulnerability he can't afford right now, not with Margaret and James circling like sharks, sensing blood. The reference to Robert's deceased wife and current corporate threats shifted the conversation from professional territory into personal warning. Morgan recognized the protective loyalty motivating Victoria's intervention, not opposition to the foundation itself, but concern about its founder's potential vulnerability. My relationship with Robert is professional. Morgan maintained composed neutrality despite the conversation's unexpected direction. My connection with Tyler stems from unusual circumstances, but remains appropriate and boundaried. If others choose to misinterpret those relationships for political advantage, that reflects their priorities rather than reality. Victoria studied her with experience assessment, measuring conviction against observation. Professional relationships don't include private dinners in the penthouse. They don't involve weekend outings with a man's son. They don't inspire him to create a foundation that conveniently solves your financial problems while keeping you within arm's reach. The accusations landed with precision, identifying patterns Morgan had justified individually while avoiding their collective implication. Each boundary crossing had seemed reasonable in isolation dinner to discuss strategic partnerships, weekend activities, at Tyler's insistence, professional opportunity based on genuine qualification rather than personal history. Together, they created appearance, if not reality, of connection beyond professional collaboration. His board meeting tomorrow includes discussion of splitting the CEO and chairman roles. Victoria continued corporate insight offered as context rather than gossip. Margaret and James have been building support for months. Robert needs absolute focus and clear judgment to maintain control. Emotional complications threaten that focus precisely when he can least afford distraction. The warning carried dual implications: that Morgan represented potential liability to Robert's professional position, and that her own role remained vulnerable to corporate politics beyond her control. Victoria's loyalty clearly belonged to Robert rather than Morgan. Her intervention intended to protect his interests, even at potential cost to the foundation or its new director. Thank you for your candor. Morgan's response acknowledged the message without accepting its underlying assumptions. I'll take your perspective under advisement. After Victoria departed, Morgan remained at her desk long past midnight, professional documents forgotten, as she confronted uncomfortable questions about her position. Had she compromised principles by accepting opportunity created through personal connection rather than merit? Had financial desperation clouded her judgment about maintaining appropriate boundaries? Had she allowed herself to become entangled in corporate drama that threatened both her professional integrity and the initiative's mission? The foundation's physical space, half-finished construction, walls freshly painted, but furniture still wrapped in plastic, potential evident, but implementation incomplete, mirrored Morgan's internal landscape. Framework established, but details unresolved, foundation laid, but structure still forming promise visible, but outcome uncertain. The path forward required clarity. She had not yet achieved boundaries. She had not fully established decisions. She had not completely made. Morgan switched off her office lights and gathered her belongings. Nocturnal Manhattan visible through the windows like a galaxy of earthbound stars. The contrast with her cabin's isolation couldn't have been more pronounced. Urban energy replacing rural silence, corporate complexity, substituting for mountain simplicity, connection, supplanting solitude. Whether this transformation represented progress or compromise, opportunity or vulnerability, redemption or repetition remained questioned without clear answer. She stepped into the empty elevator, watching floor numbers illuminate in descending sequence. The foundation occupied a middle ground in the building's vertical hierarchy, neither executive heights nor operational base situated between corporate power and practical implementation. Morgan's role occupied similar middle territory influence, without ultimate authority responsibility, without complete control connection, without full integration. Outside, rain fell on Manhattan streets. Spring storms following her from mountain to metropolis. Nature asserting continuity despite changed geography. Morgan turned her face upward, letting raindrops touch her skin, physical sensation grounding her amid psychological uncertainty. The path forward remained unclear, boundaries still forming, decisions yet unmade. But unlike her cabin's leaking roof, this uncertainty stemmed not from deterioration, but from growth, not from isolation, but from connection, not from ending, but from beginning. 6 months transformed the Open Door initiative from concept to reality. The renovated floor now hummed with purpose, staff moving between meeting rooms with determined strides, monitors displaying real-time data on families, served whiteboards covered with implementation timelines and impact metrics. What had begun as vision now manifested in concrete action, the foundation's first emergency housing center, having opened in Brooklyn the previous month. Morgan surveyed this activity from her office doorway, professional satisfaction tempering the personal complexities that had shadowed her tenure. The work itself provided anchoring amid corporate currents she still navigated with cautious precision. 37 families currently occupied transitional housing, 63 children enrolled in support programs, 15 parents participating in job training initiatives. Numbers that represented not just statistics, but transformed lives. Safety created where danger had existed, stability established amid chaos. The morning's New York Times business section lay open on her desk. The initiative featured prominently in a profile examining corporate social responsibility in the technology sector. The article praised the program's innovative approach while noting its unusual genesis and questioning whether it represented genuine strategic shift or merely billionaire reputation management. Morgan had declined direct interview, preferring results to speak louder than personalities, but Robert had provided carefully crafted comments positioning the initiative as central to Thorne Technologies' evolving mission, rather than peripheral charity. Victoria's warning from months earlier echoed in Morgan's memory. She had established careful boundaries since that conversation, limiting interactions with Robert to scheduled meetings during business hours, declining dinner invitations, regardless of stated purpose, redirecting Tyler's request for her participation in weekend activities toward foundation-sponsored events where professional context maintained appropriate distance. These boundaries protected both her reputation and Robert's corporate position during the continuing power struggle with Margaret and her allies. The ringing phone interrupted Morgan's reflection. Her assistant's voice carried unusual tension. "Ms. Thorne is here. She's asking for you specifically. She seems determined." Morgan straightened papers on her desk automatically, professional composure settling over her features like protective armor. "Send her in." Margaret Thorne entered with characteristic efficiency, corporate polish evident in every detail, from precisely tailored suit to calculated smile that activated facial muscles without reaching her eyes. Her presence in the foundation offices represented unusual territory breach. Margaret typically summoned others to her domain, rather than venturing into spaces she considered beneath her attention. I won't waste time with pleasantries. Margaret positioned herself before Morgan's desk, declining the offered chair in favor of psychological advantage provided by standing. The board meeting tomorrow includes discussion of your foundation's continued funding. As CFO, I prepared a detailed analysis demonstrating that resources allocated here would generate significantly greater shareholder value if redirected to core technology development. The threat carried no surprise, merely confirmation of opposition Morgan had anticipated since inception. She maintained neutral expression, allowing Margaret to continue without revealing emotional response. I thought you deserved advance notice, professional courtesy, given your unique position within the organization. Margaret's emphasis suggested multiple meanings, accusation lurking beneath surface professionalism. The foundation represents admirable intentions, but ultimately fails basic cost-benefit analysis. The board will make decisions based on financial reality rather than personal relationships. Thank you for the courtesy. Morgan's response matched Margaret's professional tone while avoiding engagement with underlying insinuations. I look forward to presenting our impact metrics and return on investment analysis at tomorrow's meeting. Our quarterly results exceed initial projections across all measurement categories. Margaret's smile tightened fractionally. Of course, you're welcome to present whatever data you consider relevant, but you should understand what you're really facing. This isn't about metrics or projections. It's about Robert's judgment and his distractions. She placed a folder on Morgan's desk, manicured fingernails lingering on its surface momentarily. Internal documents regarding your recruitment, the background checks, surveillance reports, financial analysis of your situation before the job offer. All the information Robert gathered while deciding whether you represented opportunity or liability. Morgan's pulse accelerated despite her outward calm, the folder's existence confirming suspicions she had previously dismissed as paranoia. Margaret continued satisfaction evident in her measured delivery. He studied you like a laboratory specimen before extending the foundation's offer. Analyzed your psychological profile, tracked your financial deterioration, even monitored your response to his little black card test. Quite thorough risk assessment before implementing his charitable intervention. The revelation landed precisely as Margaret had intended, triggering cascade of doubt about every interaction, every opportunity, every moment of connection since Robert and Tyler had appeared at her cabin door. Professional accomplishment suddenly reframed as elaborate compensation foundation leadership, as sophisticated charity, personal boundaries as unnecessary protection against manipulation already complete. You'll note the surveillance continued after you accepted the position. Margaret gestured toward the folder with casual precision. Apartment security footage, weekend movements, personal interactions. Robert protects his investments carefully, especially those involving his son's emotional attachments. Understandable precaution given your unconventional background. Your point is made. Is there something specific you're seeking beyond delivering this information? Margaret straightened, mission accomplished evident in her satisfied posture. Simply clarity about tomorrow's meeting. You're presenting to people who know exactly how and why you obtained your position. I thought you deserved to understand the actual context of your evaluation rather than operating under illusions about meritocracy. After Margaret's departure, Morgan remained motionless behind her desk, the folder untouched before her like unexploded ordnance. Professional commitments eventually forced decision preparation for tomorrow's board meeting, requiring full understanding of opposition she would face. The contents exceeded even Margaret's implications. Detailed financial analysis of Morgan's deteriorating situation, psychological profile based on previous employers' assessments, surveillance photographs documenting her movements before and after the job, offered transcripts of conversations with neighbors and former colleagues. Most disturbing were the reports dated after her employment began, security footage from her apartment building, documentation of weekend activities, analysis of her interactions with Tyler during foundation events, assessment of potential attachment risks presented by her involvement in the child's life. The intrusion's scope suggested not merely routine background check, but orchestrated surveillance, systematic violation disguised as due diligence. She gathered essential personal items with methodical efficiency, leaving foundation materials organized for whoever would assume responsibility after her departure. The email required minimal composition, formal resignation, effective immediately brief acknowledgement of professional opportunity requests that remaining compensation be redirected to foundation programming. No explanation, no accusation, no emotional language that might diminish the statement's impact. Rain greeted her emergence onto Manhattan streets, spring showers having intensified into steady downpour that complemented her internal landscape. Morgan walked without destination for several blocks, physical movement processing emotional turmoil, as pedestrians flowed around her with urban indifference to individual crisis. Eventually, practical considerations asserted themselves, shelter-needed plans required, next steps determined beyond immediate reaction to discovered betrayal. The corporate apartment represented untenable option given surveillance documentation. Hotel offered temporary alternative anonymous chain, providing basic accommodation without luxury that might trigger financial monitoring. Morgan checked in using cash withdrawn earlier that week, establishing momentary buffer zone between current crisis and decisions that would follow. Messages accumulated on her silenced phone administrative staff seeking guidance on scheduled meetings. Robert requesting immediate contact. Tyler's voice message expressing childish confusion about her absence from expected foundation tour. Each represented connections she had cautiously established despite previous betrayal, relationship now contaminated by surveillance revelation, but still exerting emotional pull. Boston offered temporary refuge through professional connections maintained despite physical distance. Former colleague Rebecca welcomed Morgan without demanding immediate explanation, providing spare bedroom and practical support while respecting emotional boundaries. The Academic Medical Center, where Rebecca directed social services, offered consulting opportunity, requiring minimal commitment beyond specific project parameters. Professional engagement without institutional entanglement. Days accumulated into weeks as Morgan established functional routine outside Manhattan's corporate ecosystem. Consulting work provided both income and professional continuity expertise applied to healthcare protocols rather than housing initiatives, but utilizing same fundamental skills. Boston's urban rhythms offered sufficient anonymity for healing without mountain isolation's complete disconnection, balance between engagement and independence that supported gradual recovery. Robert's attempts at contact continued with decreasing frequency as weeks passed, voice messages, transitioning from urgent requests for conversation to measured updates about Tyler's confusion regarding her absence to eventual statements of respect for her decision despite continued desire for resolution. Each communication represented boundary test. Morgan refused to engage silence maintaining separation she required for processing surveillance revelation and its implications. The newspaper headline appeared in Rebecca's browser one evening as they shared takeout dinner in companionable silence. Thorne Technologies announces corporate restructuring. Robert Thorne steps down as CEO. Morgan's instinctive reach toward the screen revealed emotional connection not fully severed, despite rational assessment. The article detailed boardroom coup Margaret had apparently orchestrated successfully leadership reorganization positioning Robert's brother-in-law James Harper as chief executive, while Robert retained chairman role with reduced operational authority. 4 weeks after Morgan's departure, Rebecca returned from hospital shift with unexpected information delivered with careful neutrality. There's someone waiting outside the building. Has been there since morning, according to the security guard. Matches the description of Robert Thorne, though not exactly the corporate image from business publications. Morgan approached situation with caution, developed through professional crisis management and personal experience observing from apartment window before making direct contact. Robert stood across the street, corporate polish absent, in favor of practical clothing and 3-day stubble. His patient stillness suggested prepared endurance position, maintained without aggressive intrusion, but clear intention to remain until acknowledged. Morgan descended to street level through conscious decision rather than emotional reaction. Robert registered her appearance with visible relief that suggested genuine emotion rather than calculated response. I wouldn't have come if there were any other option. His opening acknowledged boundary violation while attempting justification. Tyler's been asking for you constantly. I've tried respecting your decision, but his nightmares have gotten worse. He thinks you disappeared like his mother. My decision wasn't about Tyler. It was about discovering systematic surveillance before and after my employment. The kind of boundary violation I specifically rebuilt my life to avoid after Edward Chambers. Understanding transformed Robert's expression, realization rather than denial, suggesting information gap rather than deliberate deception. The background investigation. The security protocols at your apartment. He spoke with dawning comprehension rather than defensive justification. Margaret controlled implementation details. I authorized standard executive vetting, but never surveillance after employment. She apparently expanded scope without direct approval, creating documentation she could deploy strategically. The explanation offered plausible alternative to deliberate violation corporate machinery, operating beyond individual control systems, implementing broader intrusion, than specifically authorized Margaret manipulating processes for strategic advantage. Morgan maintained skeptical assessment while acknowledging possibility years of professional evaluation providing framework for distinguishing deception from potential truth. Show me exactly what she gave you. Robert's request carried urgency beyond conversation's measured pace. I need to understand precisely what you saw before I can explain what happened versus what she wanted you to believe happened. The conversation relocated to neutral territory, cafe 2 blocks from Rebecca's apartment, providing public setting that maintained necessary boundaries while allowing extended discussion. Morgan produced folder contents without commentary evidence, presented for examination without interpretation. Robert reviewed documents with increasing tension, evident in jawline and shoulder position. Corporate assessment transitioning to personal response as surveillance extent became clear. This goes far beyond what I authorized. His voice carried controlled anger directed elsewhere rather than defensive justification. Standard background check expanded to full surveillance. Apartment security, I requested for your protection, twisted into monitoring system. Margaret's security team implementing without direct oversight, while I focused on protecting Tyler from corporate politics. The explanation offered credible alternative without eliminating Robert's responsibility for systems operating under his authority. Even if you didn't order continuous surveillance, you created conditions where it could happen without your knowledge. Systems reflect leadership priorities regardless of implementation details. Robert acknowledged this truth without defensiveness, accountability accepted rather than deflected. You're right, I built structures that permitted this intrusion, emphasized security without sufficient privacy protection, delegated oversight to people with different priorities. The responsibility remains mine regardless of who implemented specific measures. The acknowledgement offered foundation for potential rebuilding, rather than complete resolution acceptance of accountability, representing necessary first step toward trust reconstruction. Why come find me now after weeks of separation? What changed beyond Margaret's apparent corporate victory? Tyler's nightmares started immediately after you left. Robert's response carried parental concern rather than manipulation tactics. He keeps asking when you are coming back, doesn't understand why you disappeared without saying goodbye. I've tried explaining in age-appropriate ways, but he's convinced he did something wrong that made you leave. I should have considered Tyler's perspective before leaving without explanation. Morgan's acknowledgement represented professional assessment rather than emotional capitulation. That was an error in judgment, regardless of circumstances prompting my departure. Robert's relief at this opening remained contained rather than exploited potential connection acknowledged without presumption. He's staying with my mother in Connecticut this week. School, spring break. I could arrange a visit if you're willing, neutral location where you could speak with him directly. No pressure for ongoing contact, just opportunity to provide closure if that's what you determine is appropriate. I'll meet with Tyler, one conversation, neutral location, no presumption about what follows. The parameters establish clear boundaries while permitting necessary interaction, professional responsibility, acknowledged without personal vulnerability exposure. The meeting occurred 3 days later at Boston Children's Museum public setting, providing both appropriate environment for child interaction and necessary boundaries for adult communication. Tyler spotted Morgan immediately upon arrival, breaking free from Robert's hand to launch himself forward with unrestrained joy that complicated emotional landscape beyond rational assessment. You came back, the boy's arms wrapped around Morgan's waist with familiar trust that triggered protective response, despite intellectual caution. Dad said you had to go away for important reasons, but that you didn't leave because of anything I did. But I still missed you lots. The uncomplicated affection contrasted sharply with adult relationship complications and child's perspective, simplified but emotionally authentic in ways that penetrated professional boundaries Morgan had carefully reconstructed. She knelt to eye level, maintaining direct connection without patronizing distance. "I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye. That was a mistake. Sometimes adults make wrong decisions even when trying to make right ones." Tyler considered this with serious expression, suggesting processing beyond age-typical understanding. "Like when Dad makes me eat vegetables I hate because they're good for me, even though they taste terrible. Wrong for me, but right for my body?" The innocent comparison drew unexpected laugh from Morgan, genuine emotional response breaking through professional composure. "Something like that. Grown-up problems are more complicated, but sometimes involve similar difficult choices." As their museum visit concluded, Tyler's expression shifted toward concern he struggled to articulate. "If you're still mad at Dad, could you be not mad at me separately?" His question carried emotional sophistication beyond age-typical understanding. "Like when parents get divorced but still both love the kid," Ms. Peterson explained that to me about my friend Jake's family. The request crystallized ethical complexity Morgan had professionally recognized, but emotionally resisted that adult relationship complications created responsibility toward attached child, regardless of origin circumstances or justification for separation. "I'm not mad at your dad in the way you might think. Grown-ups sometimes have complicated disagreements about important things, but that doesn't change how we feel about you." Morgan established regular contact through video calls, providing structured interaction that addressed Tyler's attachment needs without creating unrealistic expectations about adult relationship resumption. Robert respected established boundaries with careful precision, appearing briefly at beginning and end of each call without inserting himself into primary interaction. The call that altered this careful equilibrium came on ordinary Tuesday evening, Tyler's number appearing on screen for unscheduled communication outside established parameters. Morgan answered with immediate concern about potential emergency professional crisis response, overriding established boundaries. Tyler's voice emerged breathless with evident distress rather than excitement. "Dad's really sick. His temperature's super high, and he fell down in the bathroom. Ms. Peterson called the ambulance, but they're taking forever and I'm really scared." Morgan shifted immediately into action mode developed through years of emergency response training. "Tell Ms. Peterson to put cold washcloths on his forehead and under his arms. Make sure he's lying on his side, not his back. I'm coming right now. Stay on the phone with me until someone gets there." The train journey from Boston to New York stretched interminably, despite express service each minute, extending potential crisis without direct intervention. Morgan maintained phone connection with Tyler throughout transportation, providing both emotional support and practical guidance for managing situation until professional medical response arrived. By time Morgan reached Manhattan apartment building, medical crisis had transitioned from acute emergency to ongoing management. Ambulance had eventually arrived, Robert transported to hospital with preliminary diagnosis of severe influenza, complicated by pneumonia. Tyler remaining with housekeeper until family member could assume responsibility. The situation presented clear ethical imperative, transcending personal boundaries, child requiring stability during parental medical crisis regardless of previous relationship complications. The hospital corridor stretched institutional beige beyond human scale, fluorescent lighting, creating artificial environment divorced from natural rhythms or comfort. Tyler spotted Morgan immediately upon arrival at designated waiting area, launching himself forward with desperate relief that transcended established communication parameters. "You came," the words carried more weight than simple observation, faith fulfilled, rather than mere arrival acknowledged. "Dad's really sick, but the doctor said he'll probably be okay after medicine and lots of rest. But I was really scared when he couldn't wake up properly. I came as soon as you called. Being scared was completely reasonable given what happened. You did exactly the right things by getting help and staying calm enough to talk to me." Robert regained consciousness during Morgan's hospital arrival processing, medication reducing fever sufficiently for semi-coherent communication. His recognition of her presence carried surprise rather than expectation, genuine emotion rather than manipulation evident in weakened state. "You came." The simple statement echoed Tyler's earlier observation while carrying different implications. Boundary crossing acknowledged rather than arrival celebrated. "Tyler called me. He was understandably frightened by your condition and needed support. I'm here for him, rather than presuming anything about our unresolved situation. The clarification established essential parameters without dismissing genuine concern appropriate to circumstances regardless of previous complications. Thank you for coming for him. My mother can't get here until tomorrow morning. I didn't want him alone through this. Morgan stayed with Tyler at Robert's apartment until his grandmother arrived the following morning, prioritizing child welfare above personal considerations. Catherine Thorne presented striking combination of corporate efficiency and grandmotherly warmth as she managed practical necessities while providing emotional reassurance to grandson. Her assessment of Morgan carried neither suspicion nor presumption, gratitude for crisis intervention without expectations regarding ongoing involvement. Thank you for coming when Tyler needed you. Catherine's acknowledgement recognized appropriate boundaries while expressing genuine appreciation. Robert mentioned your departure had complicated circumstances, but your response to this emergency speaks to character beyond professional obligation. The observation offered recognition without manipulation, appreciation without expectation, assessment without judgment. Tyler's welfare transcends any complications between adults. I'm glad I could provide stability during the immediate crisis. As Morgan prepared for departure following Catherine's assumption of family responsibilities, Tyler's goodbye carried emotional weight beyond simple farewell attachment, maintained despite separation, connection persisting despite adult complications, resilience demonstrating capacity for managing complex relationships without complete understanding. You'll still do our video calls, right? His questions sought reassurance about continued connection rather than relationship definition. Even though Dad's getting better and Grandma's here now. Yes, we'll continue our regular calls. Your dad's illness doesn't change that arrangement. 4 weeks after medical crisis, Morgan received formal invitation delivered through professional channels rather than personal communication. Summit Enterprises Foundation annual gala recognition ceremony honoring Open Door Initiative achievements despite leadership transitions, specific acknowledgement of founding directors' contributions to program design and implementation success. Morgan's decision prioritized professional responsibility toward vulnerable populations served through initiative. She had designed attendance acknowledging program importance rather than personal reconciliation or relationship definition. The boundaries established through measured engagement rather than complete avoidance provided framework for managing potential complications while honoring legitimate contributions and ongoing mission importance. As gala attendance concluded and participants dispersed towards separate destinations, Morgan navigated Manhattan streets with measured steps rather than hurried departure. The Foundation's continued operation represented professional accomplishment transcending personal circumstances, vulnerable populations served regardless of leadership transition or founding complications. 2 weeks following gala attendance, Morgan received unexpected delivery, small wooden box with intricate carving appearing handcrafted rather than mass-produced, accompanied by formally addressed envelope rather than personal communication. Inside nestled black card, Morgan recognized immediately, same exclusive credit instrument left following cabin departure months earlier, untouched financial resource representing both opportunity and obligation. Accompanying letter provided context, transforming symbolic significance through specific parameters. This card has been reconfigured as charitable foundation instrument rather than personal financial resource. Any expenditures automatically redirect to Open Door Initiative funding, supporting vulnerable populations served through programs you design. The privilege of wealth transformed into responsibility for creating substantive change through systems you established. The reconfiguration transformed card's symbolic meaning from potential dependency to directed philanthropy, from personal obligation to mission support, from potential manipulation to structured contribution with established parameters and transparent accountability. This transformation acknowledged boundary concerns without dismissing legitimate mission importance, addressing control dynamics without requiring personal engagement or relationship definition. Summer advanced toward autumn with gradual cooling that mirrored ongoing processing regarding surveillance, revelation, and potential trust reconstruction. The envelope arrived on ordinary Tuesday morning, heavy cream stationery with formal addressing, suggesting official communication rather than personal correspondence. Inside contained single card with handwritten message rather than printed text. The cabin road appears different in each season, but leads to the same destination regardless of external transformation. If welcome, we would appreciate opportunity to visit this weekend as summer transitions toward autumn. Different circumstances, but similar location, change conditions, but constant significance. The invitation presented choice rather than obligation request, rather than presumption and possibility, without expectation. Morgan considered implications with balanced assessment boundaries maintained through specific parameters, while connection acknowledged through continued communication. Relationship status undefined, but interaction possible within established framework. Her response offered neither complete acceptance nor total rejection, but measured engagement, acknowledging both remaining caution and potential reconstruction. The path forward remained unclear, but movement continued direction uncertain, but stagnation avoided resolution incomplete, but possibility maintained through conscious choice rather than circumstance, limitation, or emotional reaction. The cabin door stood open as vehicle approached threshold, neither barrier nor invitation, but passage possibility, determined through mutual consideration rather than unilateral decision. Whatever came next would develop through conscious choice rather than accident or manipulation, direction determined through shared navigation rather than individual control, regardless of specific destination or arrival timing.